Welcome to the Road to Zero podcast. I'm your host, Nick LeBlanc, founder of Network Potential Consulting. We're here to explore the fast emerging zero impact economy, which is transforming the way we do business, bringing prosperity and regenerating the natural world in the process. And I invite you to look at how you can position your business at the forefront of this global movement. Today on the Road to Zero, we're talking to Heather MacKenzie, Executive Director of Solar Alberta, and she's joining us from Edmonton, Alberta today. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
All right. I'd love to hear a bit more what got you into solar? What got you interested in as part of now this organization that's advocating for it in the province of Alberta?
Yeah, well, I guess it's been a bit of a long road for me. I only joined Solar Alberta last year in 2020 in the fall. And so this is my first foray into professional work in the field. However, I became interested in solar at a much earlier date. I suppose dating back to when my church first decided to put solar on our rooftop. So I think that was maybe almost 10 years ago now, we started exploring it. Actually, no, correction, that was around 2015, because I do recall it was when we had some rebates available here in Alberta. And one of the plugs I said to my congregation was, these rebates might not last forever, so we better get that solar now. And so it was obviously a good sales pitch. They went forward with it. So I started learning about solar through that process. Subsequently worked with my husband and saw solar installations go up on both of our parents' rooftops and as well as our own home recently. And so very excited on a personal level about solar. But I came to Solar Alberta largely through my background in community development. I actually have a master's in international development and very, very interested in making sure that solar and renewable resources are accessible to all and not just an elite few. So I'm very interested in the energy transition and making sure it's inclusive of all Albertans. And so very passionate to be with an organization that's interested in educating the public at large and bringing everyone along on this energy transition.
Thank you. Yeah, I've noticed that you have a long record in public service, public administration. So it sounds like that working with the public and the public benefits been something you've been really working on for quite some time before you got into the solar piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely a passionate advocate for public services, and I served on the public school board here in Edmonton for 3 years. So I do have a background in that realm. But for me, renewables offer an opportunity for Albertans to have a bit of energy independence, to have a little bit of affordable benefits on their utility bills, all sorts of pieces that I think are beneficial for the general public. And so I'm very happy to be an advocate for solar in Alberta now.
Yeah, I love it. I really see that, how those two come together, that what renewable offers and that decentralized type energy system that anybody can take on, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's really a grassroots movement when you look at solar, especially as compared to other types of energy. You can get involved from the bottom up, and that is quite rare. And so it's quite exciting and makes a natural fit for someone like me who likes to do a lot of community organizing.
I love it. I'm glad to see that you found yourself a little niche that really brings everything together. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helps that I'm working with a society that's focused on public education in a not-for-profit manner. It's a very good fit for sure.
That's great. And tell us a bit more about the actual, I think you mentioned a little bit, but what are some of the projects or the big activities that you guys are doing inside of Solar Alberta to make that transformation happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So Solar Alberta has actually been a society for 30 years. This is our 30th anniversary. So it's been around for a while. It started out as sort of a do-it-yourself solar club. And there were a number of folks who literally got up on their roofs and figured out how to install solar when it was still quite expensive and challenging. we no longer recommend people get up on their own rooftops to install their own solar. We now serve two primary functions. One is as a public education society. So we run a whole series of seminars and workshops, and we have an annual solar show to educate the public about renewables and energy efficiency. And we also wear an industry hat. So we basically have come to serve as an industry hub. We're not an official association, but in the absence of an Albertan Solar Association, we have essentially come to serve as a hub for the solar industry here in Alberta. We're very happy to wear both hats these days. We do a lot of professional development for industry, as well as our public education for the folks who are either looking at getting solar installed on their own roof or just curious about solar in general.
So I see a great place if you even want to start a business or be an installer. It sounds like there's a great community to connect with to that industry.
Yeah, we try really hard to bridge a lot of those gaps where people are just curious. So a lot of people come to us just looking to meet some installers, and we have a directory that we can point people to. Or if they just want to get some quotes and they're a little overwhelmed by the process, they can actually post on our website requesting quotes from our installers. We have over 150 business members, and so they will see the requests for proposals and they will submit their quotes to the members of the public. And we also have a Alberta solar map where our installers can actually track their projects on the map. And we all know that one of the primary indicators of whether someone will adopt solar or not is whether their neighbors have adopted solar. And so it's really important to be able to show people that, oh, look, your neighbor has solar here on this rooftop on this map, and here's the installer who did it. You can give them a call and get a quote. And so, yeah, we're definitely providing those contacts and connections and helping to allow people to meet each other. We also have a number of distributors, some manufacturers, a wide variety of members, and they also utilize Solar Alberta as a means to connect with other folks in the industry.
Yeah, I like it. A very big hub that's really bringing a lot together. And I like that example of, oh, he did it and it worked. Okay, then maybe I'll try it. I can see a lot
Oh
of people
yeah.
are that. Like they don't want to be the first one. Like who's the guinea pig, and then from there it goes out.
Absolutely. Well, and now that the price of solar has come down so much, I think it's come down 90% in the last 10 years internationally. And so with the price of solar coming down, when you see it go up on your neighbor's roof, you often think to yourself, oh, well, Joe can afford solar and we have similar work. Therefore, maybe I could afford solar, so you start realizing it's potentially affordable for you if you see it go up on someone else's rooftop near you. And so that's, I think, a big game changer as well.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you make because that's you keep hearing that a lot about the economics have changed considerably, and give us an idea of how that's impacted solar. What you're seeing this last couple of years compared to what you saw 10 years ago.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. So I guess gosh, I have some good stats on this in one of my presentations, but I don't have it handy. But I do know that we went from, I think it was less than 1 megawatt of solar on the grid just maybe 5 or 6 years ago to nowadays we have 117 megawatts on the grid. A lot of that transition happened through microgeneration on rooftops of houses as well as businesses over the last 5 or 6 years, really. That is going to take off in an even bigger way. And the numbers changing daily in Alberta because we're about to go from 117 megawatts on the grid to 4,600 in very short order. So if we thought that initial transition was a steep curve, well, we're about to see a much steeper curve. So we're about to shoot off the grid because of the utility scale solar that's coming on now here in Alberta. So there is a massive change. To date, it's largely been at the microgen level because of the rebates that were in place for a few years there, and the costs of solar coming down so dramatically. And then, of course, there's also just a renewed imperative to act on climate change. So I think people are feeling that and wanting to take some personal responsibility as well. So definitely a variety of reasons that solar's taking off in Alberta at the microgen scale. And now we're embarking on our utility scale solar revolution, and it's going to be even more dramatic, the change we see.
That was the design, wasn't it? You get the rebates, nurture an industry, and then eventually it can go off on its own. And really, right now, we're at the point where there's no more rebates, and literally it's economically viable. And if not, in some cases, I would say maybe economically advantageous to go solar.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, at this point, when you hear about these power purchase agreements going forward, when companies like Labatt or RBC are choosing to purchase solar or wind, uh, while it is admirable, they are also choosing the lowest cost electricity on the grid. So it is wonderful that they're choosing to make these agreements, and it is great that they're choosing to make them for the long haul. And that's the important piece: is the investment is a stable investment. They're committing to purchase electricity for the long haul. But yes, solar and wind are now the cheapest form of new electricity on the grid, and so it's not like you're asking people for charity when you say, hey, could you get a power purchase agreement with us? It's not a handout that they're giving you. They're actually accepting a contract for extremely affordable energy. And so it is definitely a different situation that we're in now. And yeah, I think arguably a number of the supports that were in place in our early days through government supports and contract commitments and various rebates and incentives definitely helped. There are still a few places where we're not seeing uptake to the same degree that we would like. And so there are still a few rebates coming out. The government of Alberta and the government of Canada recently provided supports through the Energy Savings for Business program for essentially incentives for commercial solar to start taking off more in Alberta, because they would like to see more small, medium-sized businesses essentially benefit from having more affordable utility bills on a monthly basis through solar and other energy efficiency upgrades. And so they did provide some incentives for that, which were well received. Solar was actually oversubscribed within a few short months, and so we really were ready to move on that. A lot of people were wanting solar for their businesses and their not-for-profits, and so that's an area where government support's still a little bit needed and is coming. And of course, there are still some supports needed when it comes to the community generation side of things, because a lot of community generation project proponents have trouble affording the upfront costs of all the studies that are needed and things of that nature to get a community generation project off the ground. So there's still a place for some incentive, some rebate, some government support and assurances for sure. But you're right, it's less now than it was 10 years ago. They certainly don't need the same level of subsidies for solar to happen. And there are some new and creative techniques that governments are coming up with to support solar other than rebates and incentives. For example, Alberta is now slowly but assuredly rolling out the clean energy improvement programs. And this is called SEEP, and you've probably heard of it in the US called PACE, the Property Assessed Clean Energy. And basically, it's going to mean that for anyone where the upfront capital cost is a barrier for them to adopting solar or energy efficiency upgrades, they will no longer have that barrier, because what the government is allowing is for municipal governments, councils, to essentially provide low interest loans for solar or energy efficiency upgrades. And then the property owner can pay that off over time at a very low interest rate through their monthly property bills. And they're going to be able to do that while recognizing and receiving the utility benefits, the utility bill benefits. So in some cases, we don't know exactly how low those interest rates will be yet, but we have seen it around the world where programs like this can actually even out. And sometimes your savings on your utility bill might even equal the amount you're paying for that solar installation, and they might actually even out. So we don't know yet. We're still waiting to see what the interest rates are going to be across Alberta. There are 4 municipalities getting ready to roll with this program this year, and that's going to be a huge game changer, because all of a sudden we don't necessarily need the rebates, and we don't necessarily need the upfront capital. We're going to have another financial tool to support people in adopting solar in an affordable way. So there's some exciting innovation happening, and we're really happy to see that happening here in Alberta.
Yeah, glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you about that PACE model. So it's nice to see it's adopting, and it's really amazing when you can take away that upfront barrier. And I've heard the same thing too, where literally people like their bills even out, so you end up with having the system for free on a
Yeah,
month-to-month
yeah.
basis.
Yeah, depending. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely many factors. Some people will not be able to adopt solar without also renovating their roof and fixing up their electrical system to match. In which case, your upfront cost will be greater, and so your monthly bill for that would probably be a little bit higher. However, the neat thing about the Clean Energy Improvement Program that's rolling out across our provinces, they are going to be allowing people to put solar in place as part of a package. And so a big barrier for many families in the past is they've had their installer out to do a quote, and the installer will get there and see that the roof is in a state of disrepair. And they have to say to the family, I'm sorry, until you fix your roof, you really can't go for solar. It's not going to make sense for you. And then the family's having to choose the roof over the solar. And now with the new Clean Energy Improvement Program, they can bundle the two and do it together. And so it's a real game changer, allows a lot more people who are on a fixed income. A lot of seniors will be able to participate in solar now, and lower income household owners. Still doesn't really get at the renter demographic, and that's a problem we have to overcome here in Alberta. But it does actually make solar more affordable for lower income household owners.
Yeah, and love it. It's a simple solution, and it literally just opens that whole world of people able to take advantage of it. Like it's amazing how what of a game changer that will be. And it'd be interest to see, because that of course is going to drive a lot of industry, because also you have all this money going to buying these systems. How much do you see that industry growing in the future? How, like, I don't know
Oh,
what the percentage of people employed, but how big do you see it getting in the next 10 years?
well, I mean, I think that the industry is growing in primarily because of the utility scale solar right now. So I see the industry getting humongous. I do think the SEEP program is going to result in a lot more employment. And we do know that by and large, micro generation projects do result in more jobs created. There is some evidence of that. I think there was some research done recently, it said about 30% more jobs. But on the whole, right now, everyone's talking about the utility scale boom here in Alberta, because that's where the jobs are coming from right now for the most part. But that said, I mean, of our 150 business members, I would say the vast majority of them have been hiring even throughout this pandemic, right? There's a lot of interest in solar. Historically, people would have to hire just on contract because they couldn't actually take the risk of having an employee. Nowadays, it's becoming much more common to actually have employees and not just contractors on your payroll. And so there's definitely a lot of job creation happening on all fronts right now. It's amazing actually to feel the energy, because I know last year when the pandemic hit, it was quite depressing here in Alberta, for health reasons. We were all worried, but also because of the economic decline we were seeing. And seeing so many people laid off, and so much energy just I guess I use the term energy, but I mean the energy of the people was so low last summer. And then I got started working with Solar Alberta, and I couldn't believe the positive energy and positive vibe of it all. I mean, people were moving and shaking, and yes, I would say the recession we experienced, and the pandemic, it did still take a toll on the solar industry. I mean, there's no industry that hasn't been hit by this this economic challenge that we're all facing. But I would say the toll was less than in many other industries because people were still moving, still shaking. There's still jobs to be had. And we're seeing a huge number of folks transitioning from the oil and gas sector into the solar sector because they see it as less risky. And I just think that's fascinating, right? So 10 years ago, you'd tell people, oh, you should go into the solar sector. And they'd say, oh, no, it's way too risky, right? I can't take that kind of risk. I'm just going to stick with oil and gas. And nowadays, I get calls weekly from oil and gas workers who are saying, hey, look, I need to transition. My family can't handle the risk of this position anymore. I need a stable job. And they're coming to solar for stability.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you see that much of a shift in the economic paradigm. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the old industry just really kind of in this. It's not growing anymore, and there's this shift away from it, and especially with the price right now, where the fact that if you invest in solar, like there's a return. Whoever actually puts it in will pay lower bills. Like, literally, there's the recipe there to fund an entire economic revolution. So it sounds like you're really seeing that in the ground right now playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the skills are fairly transferable, right? If you've been working as an electrician in the oil and gas sector and then you want to transition to the solar sector, yes, there are courses to be taken and there is professional development to be had, but the transition is not so monumental as if you were trying to transition from, oh, I don't know, like if you're sitting in Ontario and you're used to manufacturing cars, it makes more sense there that they're getting into battery manufacturing, right? And this is now, they're transitioning from manufacturing to different types of manufacturing based on the new economy. And here in Alberta, if you're used to being an energy worker, you can still be an energy worker. You're just focusing on a different type of energy. So there's a pretty natural transition there. The challenge, of course, in Alberta, as with many other resource extraction economies, is how do we include everyone in that transition? Not just the men who have traditionally worked in oil and gas sector. How do we make sure that women are also part of this transition, and folks who are typically underrepresented in the energy industries? So we're definitely wanting to make sure that as we undergo this shift, and there are many people who are a natural fit to the new sector, and it's easy to transition them. But we also have to spend time and energy thinking about how do we make sure that this is a space and a place for all Albertans to participate, and make sure that everybody can get the post-secondary and other training necessary to transition.
And what do you say is key to that? Is it training, education, or what do you see that would make a difference in that area?
Talk about diversifying the workforce, whether it's within the solar sector or oil and gas sector. Of course, the recruitment piece is important, asking women if they will actually apply on jobs that you're posting. But also, it's really important that we have affordable post-secondary programs, right? Because many of the women who would be transitioning into the renewable sector, their current income levels, we know, will be well below those of their male peers. And so they need to be able to afford the retraining to transition into the sector. So governments can certainly make post-secondary more affordable if they would like to diversify the workforce, and that will certainly help. Of course, we all know the basics. If there's no childcare, it's really hard for women to retrain and to make their way into the workforce at all. So that's an issue at large. But more specifically, they also will need to know that it's a welcoming space and welcoming environment. So there's cultural changes that are needed as well to make sure that women feel welcome in the workforce here in Alberta, from a solar perspective, but also within the energy sector at large.
Yeah, and it's really interesting opportunity too, because we're seeing this industry kind of really grow from, not, I wouldn't say necessarily infancy, but from it's growing to something really bigger. So now's a great time to start putting structural pieces in to actually have some better results on that diversity front,
Yeah,
and compared to
absolutely.
like reshaping something after it's been already built.
Yeah, exactly. Why not do it from the ground up, right? And so we actually do have a seminar that's coming up in September, and we're co-hosting it with the organization WIRE, Women in Renewable Energy. And we're going to be featuring 3 women who are working in renewables or energy efficiency, and they're going to be talking about some of the ways that we can bridge the gap. And so that's both about bridging the gender gap when it comes to making sure we have 50% women in renewables, but it's also about bridging the pay gap, because as we've seen in sectors, renewables, as well as the energy sector at large, typically if you have a man and a woman doing the same job, the woman will be being paid less. And so that's true in almost any sector you can imagine, actually. I think there's a quote that said, I can't even remember it now. but basically, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an energy worker, women are generally paid less. And so so people do have to take a deep look. They have to make sure that when they're hiring, they're looking at pay equity, and also making sure they recruit a wide variety of people. And of course, the same is true for all equity seeking groups, right? There is a recent push to make sure that we're also hiring people of color, and Indigenous folks are needed in this sector as well. And we need to have space for disabled workers as well. And so there's a wide variety of people who need to be welcomed into the energy sector as workers. And, it's nice to be part of an organization that's trying to have some dialogue on those subjects and promote diversity in our sector.
Thank you. Such an important point, and especially when there's such opportunity, you definitely want to open it up to as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
And
We're
yeah,
really never going to make this transition happen if it's exclusive, right?
yeah, really good point.
Energy transition needs to be a place for all if it's going to be a success. And there are many reasons from a social justice perspective for that to happen, but also from an environmental perspective, we all need to be at the table for us to really address climate change in a meaningful way.
And then I'm curious to see the opportunity for Alberta, because you spoke a lot to that. Because as far as I know, that the prairies tend to be a very sunny place and have some of the most I don't know if you want to call it sunfall in all of Canada in a lot of ways. Can you speak to a bit of really what the capacity is for Alberta in solar and how big the opportunity is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the federal government has a good map that shows the solar generating potential across the country, and definitely southern Alberta and southern Saskatchewan are the hot spots for sure. But you can go as far north. You can go all the way up, and there's still solar generating potential in Alberta. And in fact, we have a recent blog post about how well solar does in northern climates. And a lot of times people get confused about that because they think, oh, it's so cold. How are you how are you producing solar? What they don't realize is we're talking about solar, the collection of solar light energy, not solar heat. It is a little bit harder to do solar thermal in Alberta than it would be in some of the more warm climates. There are people who do it. We have some business members who actually are proponents of solar thermal, and they get solar hot water going. But it's definitely a little more affordable these days in Alberta to do to capture the light energy from the sun as opposed to the heat. And there's plenty of light here, and so that's not an issue at all. And so yeah, we do have incredible solar potential, and that's part of why there's such a rush to occupy southern Alberta with all these big solar farms, right? The other reason, of course, that solar is taking off in southern Alberta is because we have the only market in Canada where people are able to actually invest in power purchase agreements and things of that nature. We have a different market than all the other provinces, and it's a very open, free market where basically a lot of private sector solar businesses are welcome and able to set up shop. And that's just not the case in every province. And so we are seeing huge investment in southern Alberta, in large part because of our solar generating potential, but also because our unique market allows everybody who's interested to come pretty much. We also don't have enough solar and wind on the grid yet for there to be any issue of an oversupply, right, of electricity. Some provinces have an issue where they actually don't want more electricity on the grid right now. So they're saying, no, no more utility scale solar. We don't have that issue. We have the phase out of coal happening in Alberta. And so there's lots of space on the grid for solar and wind to replace that coal energy right now. And so we have a unique market that welcomes the investors, but we also have space on our grid that welcomes a lot more renewable energy. We're trying to get to 30% renewables by 2030. There's plenty of room for everybody to participate in, and the catch for us is just everybody's rushing for the parts of southern Alberta that have the highest solar generating potential. But there are people who are looking at investing in the north as well, and they're also going to see excellent returns. It's just not quite as juicy a proposition as the southern Alberta solar potential provides.
Okay. Yeah, I really hear the province did a really good job to get itself out of the way and allow a space for industry to come in. So that's a really good point, because some provinces it's a bit more complex, and it's just a bigger headache to actually get in there and connect to the grid.
Yeah, I mean, this is the only province where you can do a power purchase agreement, and that is one of the main ways to build investor confidence. So if you're not allowing for power purchase agreements, then you have to get really creative about how are you going to build investor confidence in other ways. We have that ability here, and so yeah, we're going to have a presentation tomorrow. We have developers from Germany in attendance, as well as Brazil and others. People are coming from all over the world here because it's very open and accessible. So
Sunny days in Alberta.
Yeah, and it's a very international space as well. So that's quite exciting to be attracting that global attention for sure. We see solar taking off in countries all over the world, and Canada's a bit behind actually when you look at solar around the world. But within Canada, Alberta is definitely leading the way. So that's quite exciting to be a part of.
That's great to see. Now, so the goal is 30% by 2030. What would you say is the percentage of solar on the grid at the moment?
Last I checked, it was somewhere around 10, not solar. I think that was renewables. Sorry. Solar, I think, is around 2. If I'm not mistaken, the latest ASO report indicated 2%. But when you combine all renewables, I think it's around 10 to 12. I'd have to double check my numbers. So as you can see, there's definitely room to grow. we have a long ways before we get to our goal of 30%. And we have an even longer way before we get to any concerns around grid reliability. A lot of people like to fear monger, and they say, oh no, we're getting too much solar. What are you going to do? You need more batteries. And it's like, well, yes, we need to think about the reliability of the grid. But as Dr. Sarah Hastings-Simons, reminds us, and she was on our solar show reminding us, grid reliability becomes a much greater concern when you get to 90% renewables on the grid. And we are way off from that. So, so all the fear mongering we hear these days around, you need your base load. It's just a bit of a red herring, because ultimately we're nowhere close to the percentage of renewables you would need on the grid to be really, really terrified of reliability. And by the time we get there, I mean, battery storage is coming along so quickly, and the price is coming down so much, and it's becoming so common to integrate it into large-scale wind and solar developments that I'm really not as worried about that reliability piece as everybody else is. I know that when we get to a 90% renewables on the grid and we need to start worrying a lot about reliability, the battery piece will be there. It's already there, and it just needs to go a little bit further. And there's some potential for obviously green hydrogen and the storage capacity that goes with that. So to help fill that gap as well. So we're seeing some investments in that here as well. It's really starting to take hold in Alberta.
Yeah, no, I think you've got it between where the battery technology is going, and really green hydrogen to take up the excess of power. I think the solutions are almost already there in the market, and by the time Alberta gets there, and it's such a great point about how people don't know, and how there's a lot of information, or maybe call it misinformation out there, people are concerned about, when in reality it really doesn't apply. So I'm really glad to see that there's an organization out there that actually brings some facts and some information, because it's really badly needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of misinformation on that topic. All of us get nervous about the idea of losing our internet. I just lost mine this afternoon, and it did cause me some distress, and worse yet, to not have your fridge functioning. When you're in midst of the summer, or your heat functioning in the midst of the winter. I mean, there are some genuine concerns, but there are many existing technologies to address that, not only within the solar and energy storage world, but also when you look at geothermal and other innovations. And geothermal coupled with solar is beautiful, beautiful pairing. Talk about pairing wines with foods, but I like to talk about pairing solar with geothermal. And when you get the coupling of different types of renewable energy, you can build that reliability right in, without too much fuss. So it is something we have to think about, we have to be cautious of, and absolutely the government needs to be making sure that the distribution and transmission capacity is in place for more distributed energy. Absolutely, these are big needs, and as we transition, our transportation, we absolutely need the government and other players to be thinking about how are we going to get the right charging stations in the right places, and essentially all of the infrastructure that needs to go along with this transition. So I don't want to downplay the fact that there are things we need to be thinking about, but I do think there's sometimes people are talking about, we're gonna have all these blackouts and stuff, and really what you're hearing is certain people who would really, really like to have natural gas forever, and ultimately we need to start talking about the natural gas phase out, just as we have with coal, and that makes some people uncomfortable, right? It made people uncomfortable to talk coal phase out 20 years ago, and it makes people a little nervous to talk natural gas phase out. But that's the conversation we're going to have to start having. And I think people are getting ready for it with some facts and some information, and the technology is definitely there.
Yeah. Now, what would you like to leave with our listeners?
I think I'd just like to really encourage them to check out solaralberta.ca. We pride ourselves on having a lot of free and accessible programs. I know you can pay an arm and a leg to hear some expert panelists speak about some of these topics in greater detail, but we actually have free programming available on our website from our solar show. We also have free programming from our Thursday webinar series. And so you actually don't have to pay a lot to hear from some pretty amazing speakers. So definitely go check out the seminar series archive and the solar show at solaralberta.ca, and watch our events. We're going to be talking in August. We have August 12th. We have a panel who will be looking at how solar can play in the or participate in Alberta's carbon offset market. And so there's some interesting discussion to be had there. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have a panel coming up in September looking at how we can get more women into the renewable sector and help close that gender gap that exists. So definitely stay tuned for our events. We try and make as many of them as possible free. So you don't have to be a very wealthy person to participate in solar in Alberta. That's one of our goals.
Perfect. Well, thank you for really sharing us what you're up to and really what the situation is on the ground. And really acknowledge you for, really taking this on, leading this organization, and providing that much outreach information to the public, and making such a big difference into this transition.
Oh, well, thank you, Nicholas. It's just nice to play a small part in the bigger picture.
Yeah, and thank you for my guest. Thank you for joining us today. Check us out at www.futureproof-network.com to hear our other episodes, links to our YouTube channel, and to join our Future Proof Business Network. See you again in our next episode.